Emily Carter was known around the small town as the quiet teacher who always wore soft colors, carried a stack of books, and smiled politely at everyone she met. She lived a simple life, and most people believed she preferred it that way. But no one truly understood how deeply lonely she really was. Her routine never changed. Every morning before the sun rose, she prepared a light breakfast, tied her hair neatly, and walked along the dusty road toward the little school where she taught children from the surrounding farms and ranches. The road was calm in the early hours. Birds chirped, the wind brushed lightly over the fields, and her footsteps echoed softly as she walked. In those silent moments, she often wondered how her life had become so quiet. She would think about people she once knew, about the laughter she used to share with friends when she was younger, and about the future she once imagined. One where love would play a beautiful part. But after one painful relationship in her past, she had lost trust. She had given everything she had to someone who walked away without explanation. The shock of that loss built a wall around her heart. Instead of trying to heal with the help of others, she chose to keep herself busy. Their innocent smiles, their never-ending curiosity, and their small joys gave her a sense of purpose. But when the school bell rang and she returned home alone, her house felt too quiet. The sound of her own breathing was often the loudest thing in the room. People in town admired her kindness. She helped struggling students, stayed late to clean classrooms, and always greeted everyone with gentle eyes. But they also sensed something else, an emptiness she tried hard to hide. Some of the older women in town quietly wished she would find someone to share her life with, someone who would make her smile in a way they had never seen before. Life continued in the same slow rhythm until one cold afternoon. The school day had ended, but Emily stayed behind to prepare for a community event happening later in the week. She decorated the board, organized books, and arranged the chairs so everything would look perfect for the parents. By the time she finished, the sky outside had grown darker than she expected. Thick, gray clouds stretched across the horizon. A storm was beginning to form, and the air felt heavy with the promise of strong rain. Emily locked the classroom door and stepped outside. The wind tugged at her clothes, and the wooden sign near the entrance creaked loudly as it swayed. She adjusted her shawl around her shoulders and prepared for the long walk home. It was then she noticed someone at the far end of the schoolyard. A tall man leaned against a fence post, his hat pulled low, his coat dusted from long hours on the ranch. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking who it was: Jackson Hale, the giant cowboy everyone in town knew. Jackson was famous not because he spoke loudly or caused trouble, but because of his strength and presence. He was taller than most men, and built like someone who had spent his entire life working with cattle, lifting heavy tools, repairing fences, and riding horses through wide, open fields. But beyond his appearance, he was known for something else: his character. He helped people quietly, and never accepted anything in return. He protected neighbors during bad weather, gave food to struggling families, and rescued animals stuck in dangerous places. He spoke little, but every word he did say came from the heart. Emily had seen him several times around town. He always nodded politely at her, but never said much. She didn't know him personally, but she had heard stories. Some said he lived alone because he didn't believe he deserved happiness. Others said he had lost someone long ago. Emily didn't know which stories were true, but something about him always stood out to her. He carried a sadness that matched her own. As she stepped outside the gate, Jackson straightened and walked toward her. His boots crunched against the gravel, and the wind blew strongly enough to make his coat flap behind him. Emily felt her heart tighten. She wasn't used to receiving unexpected attention from anyone, especially not from a man like Jackson Hale. "You shouldn't be out alone in weather like this," he said in his deep, steady voice. Emily blinked, unsure why he was there. "I'm fine," she replied softly. "I didn't realize it was getting this bad." Jackson didn't move away. His eyes shifted to the sky, where the dark clouds gathered like heavy blankets waiting to fall. "Storm's coming fast," he said. "This isn't the kind of night to walk home by yourself." Emily hesitated. She never accepted help from men she barely knew. Old fears lingered in her heart, whispering that it was safer to rely on herself. But another voice inside her, a gentle, lonely one, wondered why she always pushed people away before they had a chance to show kindness. "I walk home every day," she said. "I'll be fine." Jackson looked at her calmly. His expression wasn't forceful or demanding, only concerned. "I know you can walk alone," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean you should have to." Those words surprised her. No one had spoken to her with such genuine care for a very long time. Something in her chest softened, but she didn't let it show. "You don't need to worry about me," she whispered. Jackson lowered his hat a little as if thinking, then said something that made her breath catch. "If something happened to you out here, and I knew I could have stopped it, I wouldn't forgive myself." It was such an unexpected sentence, so sincere, that Emily had no reply. She stood there, stunned, while the wind grew colder around them. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't trying to control her. He wasn't trying to make her feel weak. He simply cared. Honestly. Naturally. The way a good man cares when he sees someone alone before a storm. Emily looked down at the ground, her fingers trembling slightly from the cold and from emotions she didn't know how to handle. Jackson took one small step back, giving her space. "I'll walk with you," he said in a gentle, respectful way. "Just until you reach home." She wanted to say no, out of habit, out of fear, out of the belief that she didn't deserve this kind of attention or protection. But when she looked at him again, something in his eyes changed her mind. They were strong, yes, but also warm, like someone who carried the weight of many things yet still chose to help others. Emily nodded slowly, and that one small nod changed everything. They began walking side by side along the dusty road. The wind pushed against them, and a few drops of rain fell on Emily's cheeks. Jackson adjusted his pace so she wouldn't struggle. He kept a small distance, giving her comfort but also respecting her space. They walked in silence at first, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Emily felt strangely safe, and Jackson seemed content, simply being there. The world grew dimmer as the storm gathered strength, and the sound of thunder echoed far away. As they moved past the old barn near the edge of town, a sudden gust of wind made Emily flinch. Jackson turned slightly toward her, watching calmly, his voice steady as he said, "Don't worry. I'm right here." Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of protection, not because she was weak, but because someone genuinely cared whether she reached home safely. By the time they neared her gate, the storm clouds had thickened, and the sky looked ready to burst. Emily realized that without Jackson, she might not have made it home before the worst of the storm hit. She turned to thank him, but he spoke first. "If you need anything tonight, even if it's just someone to check on the lights or make sure the wind doesn't break a window, you can call for me." Emily's heart fluttered. She wasn't used to such direct kindness. She nodded softly, unsure what else to say. Jackson tipped his hat and turned to leave. But before he took a step, he looked back at her one last time. His voice was low, calm, and protective, not aggressive, not demanding, but filled with honesty. "You don't have to be alone tonight," he said. "Not while the storm's coming." Emily didn't know why his words warmed her so deeply. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a lonely teacher walking into an empty house. She felt seen, understood, and quietly valued. As the first heavy raindrops began to fall, she whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you, Jackson." He nodded once, turned, and walked into the storm with the confidence of a man who had just made a decision that would soon change both their lives. The storm grew louder through the night, but Emily could not stop thinking about how the evening had unfolded. She sat near her small window, listening to the wind howl as if the sky itself was restless. The rain hit the glass in fast, sharp drops, and distant thunder shook the quiet house. Normally, Nights like this made her uneasy. The sound of strong wind always reminded her of old fears she never spoke about. But tonight felt different. Not because the storm was weaker, it was stronger than usual, but because someone had finally shown genuine care for her. She kept replaying the moment Jackson walked her home. His presence had been calm and steady, even as the weather grew wild. His deep voice still echoed in her mind, repeating those unexpected words. "You don't have to be alone tonight." No one had said anything like that to her in years. It carried a meaning she couldn't ignore: protection, care, and something else she couldn't name yet. Emily made herself a warm cup of tea, hoping to settle her thoughts. As she lifted the cup to her lips, the wind slammed something outside, making her jump. She rushed to the door and saw that one of the loose boards on her fence was banging loudly in the wind. Normally, she would have braved the cold to fix it herself, but tonight she hesitated. Jackson had told her to call if she needed anything. She looked out toward the dark road, wondering if he was still nearby, maybe making sure everyone was safe before going home. She shook her head, telling herself not to trouble someone as hard-working as him. She didn't want to seem helpless. Yet, the noise from the loose board kept growing louder, and the storm's wind became sharper. Her heart raced a little, not because of fear of the weather, but because of the idea that he might actually come if she called him. Emily set the cup down and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She walked slowly to the back door and stepped outside, hoping she could reach the fence quickly. But before she could take more than 2 steps, lightning cracked brightly across the sky, lighting up the entire backyard. Emily froze, gripping the edge of the blanket tightly. And then, she heard footsteps. They weren't rushed. They weren't heavy. They were steady, as if someone knew the ground well. Even in the storm, she turned sharply, almost stumbling, and saw a tall figure approaching from the side of her house. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Jackson. His coat was soaked from the rain, his hat dripping with water. But his posture was firm, and his expression showed nothing but quiet strength. Emily didn't know whether to be relieved or shocked. "I saw your fence board swinging," he said in a deep voice softened by the storm. "Thought you might need help." Emily stared at him, unable to hide her surprise. "How did you... Were you still out here?" He nodded, wiping rain from his hat. "I walked a few minutes away, but the storm changed direction fast. I wanted to check on you before heading home." The fact that he had come back warmed her more than the blanket wrapped around her. She watched as he stepped forward, grabbed the loose board, and secured it with careful strength. Even in the storm, his movements were calm and controlled. He finished the task in only a few moments, then turned back to her. "You shouldn't be outside in weather like this," he said gently. "Let's get you inside." Emily didn't argue this time. She stepped back into the house, and Jackson followed her to the doorway, staying under the small covered area. Rain poured down his coat, and water collected at his boots, but he didn't seem bothered by the storm or the cold. Emily handed him a towel, unsure if he would accept. But Jackson smiled softly before taking it. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to come all the way back," she whispered, almost embarrassed at how grateful she felt. "I know," he replied simply, drying his face and hands. "But I wanted to." There was something humble in the way he said it. Something honest that made Emily's heart flutter. She stepped aside and gestured toward the warm kitchen. "You can come in until the rain slows, if you want." Jackson paused for a moment, as if making sure she truly wanted that. When he saw the sincerity in her eyes, he stepped inside with slow, respectful movements. He removed his hat, shook off the water gently so he wouldn't make a mess, and placed it on the counter. The room suddenly felt warmer, not because of the lamp or the tea kettle, but because of his presence. He filled the space with a quiet, strong comfort that Emily hadn't felt in years. She poured him a cup of tea without asking, sensing he might not request anything even if he needed it. He accepted the cup with gratitude, holding it carefully, His hands were large and rough from work, but his manner was soft. For a while, neither of them spoke. The storm shook the windows, but inside, the silence was calm rather than uncomfortable. Emily took a seat across from him at the small wooden table, and Jackson sat down slowly, making sure he didn't disturb anything. His eyes wandered around the room, noticing the simple decorations, the neat shelves of books, and the small vase of flowers she kept on the windowsill. "You keep a peaceful home," he said, his voice low. Emily smiled faintly. "I try." "It suits you," he added, looking into his tea. Her heart beat faster at that. Compliments always made her shy, but coming from him gentle, rare, and honest, it felt different. It felt meaningful. She finally gathered the courage to ask, "Do storms bother you?" Jackson shook his head. "Not the weather. What bothers me is knowing someone might be alone and scared when they don't have to be." Emily looked down at her hands. No one had ever spoken like that to her. She wasn't used to people noticing her fears or caring about her comfort. "It's been a long time since someone checked on me like that," she said. Jackson studied her quietly. "You deserve people who care," he said softly. "You give so much to others. It's only right that someone looks out for you too." The sincerity in his words made Emily swallow hard. She didn't know how to respond, so she kept her eyes on the table. But Jackson wasn't finished. "You don't have to believe me right away," he said gently, "but I'll keep showing you." Emily lifted her eyes slowly. Their gaze met, and for the first time, she didn't look away. The storm outside suddenly sounded far away. Jackson took a slow breath, then spoke in a voice that was rough but warm, as if the words came from deep inside him. "I meant what I said earlier," he murmured. "You're not alone tonight." Emily felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Trust. Not complete trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. A tiny seed planted in the storm. Before she could reply, a loud banging sound echoed again, this time from the front of the house. Emily jumped slightly, the old fear returning for a moment. Jackson stood up immediately, his chair sliding back softly. "It's just the wind," he said calmly. "Let me check." Emily nodded and followed him to the hallway. She watched as he opened the door, scanned the porch, and made sure everything was secure. Lightning flashed behind him, and for a moment his tall silhouette looked powerful and protective against the stormy sky. When he stepped back inside, his voice was steady. "Everything's fine." Emily released a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Jackson's calmness washed over her like warmth. He watched her for a moment, then said something that sent a deep, unexpected peace through her chest. "You're safe," he said. "Not tonight. Not as long as I'm here." His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't demanding. It carried no pressure. It was a promise. A simple, honest, human promise. And something inside Emily believed him. She felt a small tremble of emotion, the kind that comes when someone touches a part of your heart you thought was unreachable. Jackson seemed to notice her reaction, but didn't push further. The storm continued to roar outside, but inside the house, there was warmth, safety, and a growing connection that neither of them fully understood yet. Emily gestured toward the table again, her voice soft. "Will you stay a little longer? Until the storm calms?" Jackson nodded, not hesitating even for a moment. "As long as you want." They returned to the kitchen, and this time, Emily talked more freely. She shared stories about her students, about funny things they did, about the challenges she faced as a teacher, and about how much she loved helping them learn. Jackson listened with full attention, nodding, smiling gently at times, and asking thoughtful questions. When he spoke, he told her about the ranch, about long days fixing broken fences, rescuing stray calves, helping neighbors with their livestock. He explained how peaceful the fields were at dawn, how the horses responded to soft voices, and how he liked the honesty of simple, hard work. Emily found herself laughing quietly at one of his stories, surprised at how easy it was to talk to him. She hadn't laughed like that in a long time. Jackson smiled at the sound. "I like seeing you happy," he said softly. Emily felt her cheeks warm. She didn't look away this time. The storm outside slowly began to weaken, the thunder becoming distant. But inside the house, something new was beginning. Something warm, gentle, and full of possibilities. By the time Jackson finally prepared to leave, Emily felt something she never expected to feel with someone she barely knew, a quiet longing for him to stay just a little longer. When he stepped onto the porch and placed his hat back on his head, he looked at her with eyes filled with meaning. "You don't have to face storms alone anymore," he said. Emily swallowed the emotion rising in her throat. "Thank you, Jackson, for coming back, for everything." He gave her a small, warm smile. "Anytime." As he walked back into the night, Emily stood in the doorway, watching him until he disappeared into the softened rain. The lonely teacher who didn't believe in love felt something new blooming inside her, a hope she thought she had lost forever. The storm passed during the night, but its memory stayed with Emily long after the clouds drifted away. When she woke the next morning, her first thought was not about school, or lesson plans, or the long day ahead. Her first thought was about Jackson Hale, the giant cowboy who had walked through the storm just to make sure she was safe. She sat up slowly, letting the early sunlight warm her room. Usually, she felt the same old heaviness each morning, a quiet sadness that followed her everywhere. But today was different. Today, she felt light, warm, hopeful. The way she felt after talking to Jackson was something she could not forget. No matter how hard she tried, she replayed his words in her mind, the gentle tone, the protective look in his eyes, the silent promise behind every sentence. She felt her face warm as she remembered how he dried himself in her kitchen, how he listened to her stories, and how he said she didn't have to face storms alone anymore. No one had spoken to her with such sincerity in years. Emily prepared for school with a smile she didn't even notice forming. She walked down the dusty road. And though the ground was still wet and soft from last night's rain, the sky was clear, painted in soft blue and gold. Children began arriving one by one, running excitedly through puddles, their laughter echoing across the yard. Emily's heart felt unusually full. Inside the classroom, everything moved normally. She taught math, corrected spelling, helped the younger children with reading, and settled small arguments between playful students. But every now and then, she glanced out the window, wondering if Jackson was somewhere out there repairing fences or riding across the open fields. She wondered if he had also thought of her that morning. Near midday, as Emily helped a child tie his shoes, she heard someone calling her name from outside. She turned slowly, unsure who it might be. When she looked out the window, her breath caught. Jackson stood near the playground fence, holding a small wooden toolbox in one hand. His hat shaded his eyes, but she could still see the soft smile he gave her. He had come to fix the broken fence around the school, just like he said he would. For a moment, she felt her heart skip. Emily stepped outside, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Children gathered around Jackson immediately, some admiring his tall figure, others asking if he really fixed things for a living. Jackson answered them patiently, even laughed when one little boy asked if he could lift a horse with one hand. Emily watched quietly, amazed at how gentle he was with the children. His rough hands built for heavy work, moved carefully as he measured the broken wood and sorted through his tools. When one child tripped while running around him, Jackson caught the boy quickly, steadying him before he could fall. He checked the boy's knee with gentle fingers and spoke to him softly, making sure he wasn't hurt. Emily felt something warm spread through her chest. Seeing Jackson like this changed everything. He wasn't just the quiet cowboy people talked about. He wasn't just a strong man who worked on a ranch. He was patient, thoughtful, and good-hearted. He noticed details most people ignored. He cared for others without drawing attention to himself. When he knelt down to hammer in new nails, sunlight hit his face at just the right angle. Emily's breath caught again. She didn't know what to call the feeling growing inside her. But it was something she had not felt in years. Something deep and gentle, like a flower slowly opening its petals. After finishing the repairs, Jackson stood and brushed the dust from his jeans. The children thanked him before running off to play. Emily finally approached him, her steps slow but steady. "That was very kind of you," she said softly. Jackson shrugged lightly, but his eyes were warm. "I told you I'd fix it." "You didn't have to come this soon," she replied. "You must be tired from ranch work." Jackson looked down for a moment, then back at her. "Some things can't wait. And I wanted to see how you were doing after last night." Emily felt her cheeks warm again. She lowered her gaze, trying to hide her shy smile. "I'm all right," she said. "Better than usual, actually." Jackson nodded. "Good." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken emotions, respect, admiration, and something tender neither knew how to name. Emily didn't want the moment to end, but she had to return to her class. She gave him a small smile before stepping back inside. Jackson watched her go with a look she didn't see, one filled with quiet admiration. The afternoon passed slowly, but Emily found herself glancing outside again and again, hoping he would still be there. But when she finally stepped outside after school, Jackson was gone. Only the repaired fence and the faint boot marks in the soft ground showed he had been there at all. Emily sighed softly. She wasn't disappointed, just thoughtful. Something was happening between her and Jackson, something she didn't fully understand yet, but something she couldn't ignore. A few days passed. Jackson didn't come to the school, but his presence stayed with her everywhere she went. She found herself listening for his footsteps, watching for his tall figure whenever she walked home, and thinking about his deep, steady voice late at night. One afternoon, when Emily finished grading papers at home, she heard a knock on the door. Her heart jumped. She opened it slowly, half expecting to see one of her students or a neighbor. But it was Jackson. He stood on her porch, his hat in his hand, his hair slightly messy from riding through the wind. His shirt was dusty, and his boots were scratched from long work hours. But his eyes were gentle, the same warm gentleness that had stayed with her since the storm. "Sorry to come unannounced," he said, his deep voice careful. "I was passing by and thought I should check if everything's all right." Emily smiled, unable to hide how happy she was to see him. "Everything's fine," she said softly. "I'm glad you stopped by." Jackson stepped onto the porch. He didn't enter her home without being invited, showing the same quiet respect he always carried. "I wanted to ask something," he said, looking slightly unsure, as if he feared she might refuse. "What is it?" Emily asked. Jackson rubbed the back of his neck, took a slow breath, and said gently, "Would you like to walk a little? The weather's nice." Emily's heart fluttered. She nodded without thinking too long. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." They walked down the quiet road together, side by side. The evening sun bathed the fields in golden light, and the breeze carried the soft smell of grass and distant flowers. Jackson kept his steps slow so she could walk comfortably. He didn't touch her, didn't rush the moment. He simply stayed close enough that she could feel his presence. As they walked, they talked more than they ever had before. Jackson shared pieces of his past, how he grew up on the ranch, how he loved animals, how he enjoyed working with his hands. He told her about the loneliness that came with wide-open fields, and how sometimes the silence of the ranch felt too heavy. Emily shared her own past. She told him about the heartbreak she rarely spoke about. She told him how she had once believed in love, but lost all faith after being hurt deeply. She explained how she threw herself into teaching because it felt safer than letting someone close. Jackson listened without interrupting. He didn't judge, didn't question, didn't try to change her feelings. He simply listened, and that alone made her feel seen. "It wasn't your fault," he said quietly when she finished. "Sometimes good people get hurt by those who don't know how to value them." Emily felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time since her heartbreak, someone understood without pushing her to forget the past. They walked farther down the road until the sun began to set behind the hills. Emily didn't realize how close she had moved to Jackson until she felt his arm brush softly against hers. She didn't pull away. The small contact felt safe, comforting, like a connection that didn't need words. As they reached her gate again, Jackson turned to her with a softness she had never seen before. "You deserve someone who stays," he said. "Someone who doesn't walk away when things get hard." Emily swallowed, her heart trembling. "I've never met someone like that," she whispered. Jackson's voice grew even softer. "Maybe you have now." Her breath caught. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything. Jackson touched the brim of his hat gently and stepped back. "I'll walk you home tomorrow too," he said, "if you want." Emily nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want that." Jackson smiled, small, warm, and full of something new. Something promising. As he walked away into the twilight, Emily stood at her gate, watching him go with a heart that no longer felt lonely. For the first time in years, she believed that the walls around her heart were beginning to crack, not because someone forced them open, but because someone cared enough to stay on the other side and wait. The days that followed were some of the most peaceful Emily had ever experienced. The stormy night had brought something unexpected into her life, something she never thought she would feel again. Every afternoon, she found herself looking forward to the quiet hour when school ended and the road home stretched in front of her, because she knew Jackson would be there. He didn't make grand gestures. He didn't bring expensive gifts or say dramatic lines. He simply showed up every single day. He walked beside her, carried her books when the load was too heavy, and asked her about her students with genuine interest. He listened to every word she said, even the small details she didn't think anyone cared about. And when she laughed, he watched her with a quiet warmth, as if her happiness was enough to make his long days worth it. The townspeople noticed. They saw the way Emily's smile grew brighter, how she walked with a little more confidence, and how Jackson seemed to soften around her even more. Some whispered curious comments. Others gave knowing smiles. But nobody interfered. Everyone in town knew that both Emily and Jackson carried their own silent sorrows. Seeing them together felt right, like two lonely souls finally finding a place to rest. One evening, just as Emily finished locking the classroom, she heard familiar footsteps behind her. She didn't even need to turn around to know it was Jackson. His presence had become so familiar, so comforting, that she could tell it was him simply from the way the air changed. "You ready to go home?" he asked, his deep voice gentle. Emily turned and smiled. "Yes, I am." They walked slowly, not because they were tired, but because neither wanted the time to pass too quickly. The sun had dipped low, painting the fields in shades of orange and pink. Birds settled on fences, and the scent of warm grass filled the air. Jackson walked with his hands in his pockets, his hat tilted slightly forward to block the light. Emily walked with small, careful steps, but her pace matched his so naturally it felt like the road was meant for them alone. As they reached the halfway point to her house, Jackson slowed down and glanced at her. "Can I ask you something?" Emily looked up at him, nervous but curious. "Of course. You said the other day that you haven't met someone who stays," he said quietly. "Do you believe that's changing now?" Emily's heart fluttered. She wasn't used to men asking emotional questions. Her past had taught her to hide her feelings, to keep everything inside where no one could hurt her again. But Jackson was different. He didn't force her to answer. He didn't push. He simply gave her space to tell the truth. She looked ahead at the road, her voice soft. I'm starting to believe it. Because you're the only one who ever tried to stay. Jackson's steps slowed even more. He didn't smile widely or respond with dramatic words. Instead, he gave a small, humble nod, as if her trust was something valuable he didn't want to mishandle. I'm glad, he said. I want to be someone you can rely on. Emily felt warmth bloom in her chest. She didn't know how deeply she could let him in. Not yet, but she knew she wanted to. And Jackson, he was patient enough to wait. When they reached her house, Emily stopped at the gate. She wasn't ready for him to leave, and she sensed he felt the same. For a long moment, they stood there in silence. The gentle evening wind brushing past them. Would you like to come in for some tea? She asked, speaking before her courage could disappear. Jackson's eyes softened. I'd like that. Emily walked inside, her heart beating fast in a way that felt both exciting and terrifying. Jackson followed behind her with slow steps, removing his hat and wiping the dust from it. When he entered the kitchen, he paused, taking in the warm glow of the lamp, the gentle scent of herbs from her small garden jars, and the cozy quiet of her home. You always make this place feel peaceful, he said. Emily smiled shyly. Or maybe it only feels peaceful when you're here. Jackson looked at her with surprise, but a small smile formed on his lips, gentle, almost grateful. While she brewed the tea, Jackson walked around the edges of the room, noticing tiny details he had missed before. A small painting made by one of her students. A shelf filled with books she read at night. A collection of pressed flowers she kept between old pages. You surround yourself with beautiful things, he murmured. Emily turned, a little embarrassed. I guess I like anything that feels calm. You deserve calm, Jackson replied. You deserve more than that. Actually. She didn't know how to respond. His words always carried an honesty that settled straight into her heart. After tea, they walked to the porch. The sky had darkened to a deep purple, and stars were beginning to appear. The quiet was comforting, soft wind, distant crickets, and the warmth between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Emily looked at the stars. Jackson looked at her. He finally broke the silence with a gentle voice. You know, when I first saw you walking in the storm that night, something inside me told me to go to you. Not because you needed help, not because you were in danger, but because I could tell you were someone who carried too much, alone. Emily swallowed, emotions rising slowly. I did, for a long time. Jackson moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt his warmth. You don't have to anymore. Emily's eyes stung with sudden feeling. She blinked away tears before they could fall. Sometimes, I don't know how to let someone stay, she whispered. You don't have to know right away, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. His promise felt strong enough to lift years of heaviness from her. She took a slow breath, letting the truth sink in. Why are you so gentle with me? She asked, her voice almost trembling with honesty. Jackson didn't answer right away. He looked at her with deep, steady eyes that carried their own stories of loneliness and quiet longing. Because you deserve someone gentle, he said finally. And because being around you makes me feel calm too. You look at me like I'm more than just a man who works on a ranch. You see me. Not everyone does. Emily felt her chest tighten with emotion. She had never known that someone like him, strong, hard-working, admired, could feel unnoticed. But she understood his words in a deeper way. She had always felt invisible too. She stepped a little closer, their shoulders almost touching. You are more, she whispered. Much more than you realize. Jackson exhaled quietly, as if her words settled somewhere deep inside him. The wind shifted gently, and the porch light flickered. Emily looked down, then back up at him, her voice soft, but steady. "I don't feel lonely when you're here." Jackson's hand twitched slightly at his side, like he wanted to reach for her but didn't want to startle her. "I don't feel lonely when I'm with you either." For a moment, everything around them faded the night. The stars, the sound of crickets. All that remained was the quiet space they shared. Emily took a slow breath, making a decision that felt both terrifying and freeing. She stepped closer until the distance between them was small, but still respectful. Her voice trembled lightly as she whispered, "You can stay. If you want." And Jackson's eyes softened, deeply protective, warm, full of emotion he had kept hidden for too long. "I want," he answered simply. He didn't reach for her. He didn't pull her into an embrace or do anything dramatic. He simply stayed there beside her, close enough for her to feel safe, close enough for her to understand that he meant every word he'd said since the night of the storm. They stood like that for a long, peaceful moment, letting the quiet night wrap around them like a gentle blanket. Eventually, Emily leaned her head slightly against his arm, just a small touch, just a soft gesture of trust. Jackson went still, surprised, then slowly relaxed, allowing the moment to settle naturally. He looked down at her with a tenderness he rarely showed to anyone. "You don't have to be lonely anymore," he whispered. Emily closed her eyes, letting his words sink deep into her heart. For the first time in years, she felt a future opening in front of her. Not one filled with fear or doubt, but one filled with hope, kindness, and gentle companionship. The lonely teacher who once believed she would never trust again had found someone who didn't try to break her walls, but someone who stood beside them, patient and steady, until she chose to open the door herself. And the giant cowboy who once wandered through life with silent storms inside him finally found a place where he belonged, right beside her, under the soft glow of a porch light. In the quiet town, both of them called home. Their story didn't end with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It ended with something far stronger, two hearts healing together, slowly, honestly, and beautifully.